International Women's Day, the theme is Count Her In, Invest in Her. We've seen greater investment in women's sport in recent years with professional sport and in certain Australian states where there are clear policy objectives. Victoria appears to lead the way with investment in projects and research. We are Griffith University researchers who are part of the Sport and Gender Equity Research Hub. All of us have different histories and connections to sport, and we all work towards making sport more inclusive for everyone. Today, we're going to have a short conversation about sport and the key areas that we see require investment to support greater gender equity across all aspects of sport. So I'll just put it out there, maybe to Simone to start with. What are some of the areas that you think require investment to support greater gender equity in sport?
Yeah, this is a really big question, and it's pretty fundamental to progressing women's sport in Australia. And I think to do that, we really need to have some serious policy conversations about a national framework, because we're seeing kind of different states doing different things, and there's certainly underinvestment across the whole country. So what can we learn from the states like Victoria and New South Wales are doing more? What are we learning from what they're doing well? And how can we expand that in terms of thinking about grassroots participation, supporting volunteers, thinking about pathways to elite as well. So thinking about that whole spectrum, but also really paying attention to the sport workforce and volunteers included in that. Like, how are we getting women into key roles so that they're being able to exercise decision making? So if we want to affect change and investment, we need to make sure that we're having those conversations about where is the money going and what is the thinking about how we spend. So that might be, as we've seen with the Women's World Cup, major infrastructure investment, but where's that money actually going on the ground? And how is it helping change the culture of the sport and the way decisions are made? So we have more women coming onto boards and governance roles, getting into coaching, all of those areas that need attention and investment. So I'm really thinking about how do we do that in terms of our policy systems at all levels of government. And then that can drive conversations with what sport organisations are doing as well. So we do need that big systems thinking approach to try and tackle the everyday issues and opportunities where the money flows down to effect.
So thinking about economic investment and things like that, what's the importance of having gender budgeting within the context of women in sport, do you think?
I can chip in the idea of how, just taking on from what Simone said, that how we're thinking about these policies and what are the specific areas in which our strategic investment is not only going to have big, wider infrastructural changes, but grassroots level changes. And I think gender budgeting, which is essentially a way to achieve fair funding and equality for women and men by focusing on how public money is spent in sporting infrastructure and sporting bodies. So it could be the big structures, it could be the small grassroots level clubs as well. So I think one of the things that we can achieve through thinking around gender budgeting is, first of all, acknowledging that inequalities exist. I think if we commit to gender budgeting, we are not giving any scope to ourselves to denying the inexistence of this inequality. We are acknowledging that there are differences in the way sport plays out and sport opportunities play out. Second of all, I think, again, sort of carrying on from what Simone was saying, that where exactly are these money going? There's a lot of lack of clarity and grayness within those areas. So I think that there was a report published by the Australian Sports Commission last year around percentage of women's participation in sport and physical activities. And that report sort of showed that there was a steady increase in sports participation up until a certain age. But then after the age of 35 and 40, 45, the sports participation sort of declined steadily. So I think then that gives us two parameters to work with. Then we can think around gender budgeting for women of a certain age as a priority. So I think it's just gives us an opportunity to work with the various parameters and think of where the benefits going to come at a way where it's not just about equality but equity.
And just around that, what do you think the role of researchers can be in gender budgeting, for example, or policy work, what you were talking about, Simone?
Yeah, I think research is often not well understood in the sports sector. We have a lot of focus on big numbers and data sets, and even some of the national data we collect, Australian statistics or Ausplay data collects, is not nuanced enough. You know, we need more of an intersectional focus. You know, what's happening for women with a disability? What's happening for First Nations women? We don't even collect any data on sexuality. There's so many gaps. Women from diverse cultural backgrounds, age, as Diti said. So we need to have that sorted out, and that links to policy agendas. But I think in terms of us as researchers, the potential is, you know, endless for collaborating and developing partnerships to explore the complexities of the issues. And we have so many different research methods that we can share with the sports sector that they don't often know about, and can really get to the heart of understanding people's experiences, and also working with sport administrators, policymakers, coaches, people on the ground, you know, doing the framing and delivery of services. So we really tackle that complex issue about policy implementation and practice. How do we improve practice? How do we change cultures? How do we engage in better knowledge sharing and translation? And we're certainly seeing that improve in Australia. But other countries like Canada are doing a much better job because they actually fund sport and gender equity research. So we've seen that in Victoria with their investment in research related to their policy frameworks. So research is the missing piece of the important investment puzzle, I think, at the moment.
Yeah. And so we're talking about investing in women. So how has the recent women's events, such as the FIFA Women's World Cup, challenged some of the stereotypes of the economic impact of women's sports?
So I definitely think that there have been sort of a change in some of the stereotypical narratives that were often propagated around women's sports. So there was constant discussion around how it is not good enough for bringing enough spectators. There wasn't enough economic outcome. So I think the World Cup has sort of, the way it unfolded, the amount of spectators it brought, the kind of sort of TV and broadcasting rights and coverage it got, did help in bringing like some of those changes. So for example, Cricket Australia is sort of on its way to becoming a major Australian sporting body, and to achieve that is achieving pay parity at a domestic level, which is an important step forward. Outside of Australia and India, for example, the Indian Women's Premier League is set to become one of the most lucrative teams in the world. And at the moment, as we speak, the women's IPL, the women's version of the Indian Premier League, is going on as we speak. And it has brought in huge revenue and spectatorship within the Indian sporting audience as well. Women's Basketball League has raised $75 million last year to support players for demands for expansion, higher salaries, better benefits. I think we are seeing changes, but there's definitely a long way to go. There's still many ways in which, the questions around, lack of representation, lack of pay parity will persist, and that will need to be addressed consistently.
I think the Women's World Cup really burst some of those myths that no one wants to watch women's sport, because actually we can say, well, we have evidence that they do, and that it can be just as exciting and thrilling than any man's game than we've seen. So that was such a good example right in front of our faces for this moment. But it was only because somebody took that chance to showcase it, to bring those cameras and to focus on those women, and to bring that on the world stage. If, like we see in all other types of areas, people say, oh no one wants to go to that, so we won't put it on the main channel, so therefore no one watches it because it's not on at a good time. So it's such a paradox at times.
Yeah, if I could just jump in there, Adele, because I think that's, such an important moment to reflect on. And often everyone's enjoyed the spectacle, and we're hearing a lot about the rise in girls and women wanting to play football, and they're not still being enough spaces, or, there's still a lot of challenges about the capacity of those clubs and organisations to provide opportunities. So we are in that tension, that paradoxical moment. And what we often don't see, I think, around the World Cup is enough about the invisible work that women are doing behind the scenes, all the advocacy, all the labour that teams are doing to achieve gender parity in pay. So watch out for the new film Trailblazers, the documentary that's coming up about the Matildas and what they've been through, because we can learn a lot, just like the American women's team as well. The amount of work that goes into affecting change is often not well understood.
Yeah. And there's a lot of burnout, and these things have been happening for so many years, and there continues to be backlash. If anybody cares to read the comments on any article about women in sport, you'll see that there are still people who believe that women shouldn't be in that sphere of public life, unfortunately, which is connected then to the increase in domestic violence that we have in Australia. I think those outdated gender norms. Anyway, we had with the FIFA Women's World Cup, there was also the Paramatildas, but we saw very little of them. And women with disabilities are probably one area where we're not focused at all. Whenever you see advertisements for disability sport, it's usually just men in wheelchairs, which is great that there are opportunities. But how can we ensure that women with disability are not excluded from this growth in women's sport?
I think part of that is just recognizing women with disability existence in some ways. Often we talk about women in sport and it's just able-bodied women, or as you said, men with disability in sport. And they're kind of two discrete categories, and we don't really consider women with disability. So that would be the first step, is just kind of recognizing that existence and recognizing that that's an area that we've really failed to invest in. And I think thinking about the FIFA World Cup as, this flashpoint for women in sport, I think the most recent Paralympics were the most watched in Australia, the 2021. But they're only once every 4 years, or once every 2 years if you include the Winter Paralympics, which don't really have much visibility in Australia. And there's been no real way to kind of like build that over time and build that throughout the years where there isn't necessarily Paralympics. So we need to invest in, for example, like there's women's basketball leagues, there's women's goalball leagues, there's rugby leagues, which includes women and non-binary people. But there's very little investment into making those leagues sustainable, into making sure they have enough funding to be able to keep going year after year. Very little investment in making sure they're on television at all. So I think that's really an area where we needed to build on the momentum of the Paralympics, and I don't think we have necessarily, especially for women with disability. But that's not, there is some good news. For the London Marathon, for example, just recently gave equal prize money to their wheelchair athletes with able-bodied athletes. So there is some recognition in those sports that that these are elite athletes competing at that level and need to be recognised, but it needs to be throughout the whole system, and making sure, and in that case, from grassroots sports all the way up to elite sports. So making sure women have the ability to play at whatever level they want to play at, and they're in a safe environment, and they're able to play sport however they want to play sport.
And how do you think research can help with this area in particular?
So there are various things that prevent women with disability from playing sport, we think, that have been outlined. For example, things like cost, kind of stereotypes about women with disability, but we actually just don't know that much. There has been very little research on women with disability, and especially their experiences, and kind of more in-depth research, as opposed to just those kind of like numbers that maybe aren't nuanced enough. So I think research will kind of give us more of an insight as to what's preventing women with disability from playing sport, and what's kind of hindering them throughout their pathway of their career.
Yeah. I often also think about, women with invisible disabilities or other barriers. We know that women are, have a high likelihood of having been sexually abused or assaulted. We know that they've probably experienced some kind of trauma or, other, adversity in their lives, yet we don't address that when we think about wanting them to participate in sport. We're like, sport is just good. You can just come here. But the government and sport organisations talk a lot about sport being good for our health and well-being, but we don't. But we know that sport can be a place of stress, gendered politics, competitive cultures that make people not want to participate. So I wonder how sports might be able to better include girls, women, and non-binary people who would like to, or even might need the well-being benefits of sport, but that don't feel welcomed. From my perspective, what I think we need is to bring different lenses to looking at sport, that it's not just an economic lens or a biological kind of physical health lens. Can we bring a creative lens? Can we bring a trauma-informed, like a movement lens? Can we bring some stuff from areas like dance or yoga into sport to learn from, to kind of cross-pollinate or something? What does anybody else have thoughts about how we might make sport more welcoming for people who, for various reasons, whether visible or invisible, haven't felt that sport's a place for them?
Didi, do you want to go next?
Yes. I think in addition to all the different ways that you already mentioned, Adele, I think one of the things that comes to my mind and it has helped me sort of navigate my own journey around fitness and sport is to really think of sport as something that is for people who are struggling with health issues, and it's not for people who are already fit or for elite athletes. So it's engaging and thinking about the people who are sort of distant from it or have discomfort with engaging with physical activities or sport, and how we can center those voices through the different avenues that you mentioned. So I think if we address some of the emotional difficulties, we can think around how we can make this space more welcoming.
Yeah, I love that idea, because not everyone wants to be active or play sport to win. Like, it is one logic, and then that's fine for people who want to, are really competitive, but others want to play for social connection, for just the enjoyment of mastering an activity and the skill and everything that can bring. So when we hear all these policy discourses about the health and mental health benefits of sport, it always makes me think and come back to this idea of we have to have a gendered or feminist intersectional understanding, because if we don't and we just try and increase sport participation, we widen the disparities that currently exist. And that is the antithesis of what sport claims it's trying to do and deliver social good. So the economic and the feminist points really have to come together all the time in our thinking about the way in which we even frame sport promotion and development and policies, as well as, everyday welcoming cultures on the ground, and how we can subsidize opportunities to, really kind of address those inequalities.
I think it's also really important for people that do like competition, like I like to win personally, but is to make sure that those communities and cultures don't have those kind of bullying aspects, don't have that emphasis on food and bullying over weight, don't have the like the competitive cultures that are so toxic that they're putting people in an overly stressful or position that's affecting their mental health. So I think it's about having the options of the different kinds of sports that are available to everyone.
Yeah, and respecting those logics. I mean, I think for me, it's kind of about how we can create opportunities for people to express their embodied, being, becoming sports people, whatever that means to them. And yeah, in a safe and respectful way. And that does require us to be thinking about how we undo and unlearn a lot of those normative sport practices that rest on predominantly masculine, white histories, able-bodied histories.
It's something that I, think about a lot is, as a feminist researcher doing work in sport, that, it's not just about doing research about women in sport, it's about doing feminist research. So bringing a different ethos, a different lens to this thing that we call sport, that for so long has been very much a male-dominated space throughout history. So it's trying to think anew and think these spaces fresh as much as possible. I don't think that I'm going to, change the world, but at least bring little pockets of change that you don't know where it might end up. So it's not just add women and stir and you've got something good. Like, we have to think about how women and non-binary people can be included and bring themselves to that space, not have to change to fit into that space.
Yeah, I think just as my final wrap-up point, I would say, if we're investing in women, we need to be thinking about how we invest in research methods and feminist thinking that positions women's lived experiences in their full diversity as part of the knowledge we need to create, and to always have them part of that collaborative, co-design, co-production way of working.
Well, that was a good chat. You can check out some of our research at Sage at Griffith. Just Google Sage Griffith and you should find our website and our contact details. Thank you.